A tempest roared over Portland, Oregon, on an October night in 1995 when a thunderclap shattered the silence of Clara Evans' isolated cabin. Alone, with the wind howling through the cracked windows, she stumbled among dusty furniture, searching for candles in the darkness. At 29, a former journalist whose glorious past was now reduced to ashes, Clara lived as a recluse in the dense forests north of the city, where the ceaseless rain seemed to echo her broken soul. But that night, something changed. As she opened a box of forgotten memories, a yellowed letter fell out, the name Clara, written in the shaky handwriting of her mother, who had died 5 years earlier. With trembling hands, she read the first lines by the weak beam of a flashlight. "If you find this, it means I'm leaving. There are truths I never told you, Clara. Search the past, but be careful who you trust." Clara's heart pounded. Her mother, a reserved librarian, had never mentioned secrets. The letter ended with a date, May 15, 1970, and a scribbled word: forgive. What did it mean? Before she could process it, a crash at the door made her jump. A gust of wind blew it open, revealing a hooded figure that vanished into the storm. Portland, with its fog-shrouded streets and the distant sound of streetcars, was a city of contrasts, wild nature and vibrant subculture. For Clara, however, it was a refuge and a prison ever since a failed journalistic investigation had accused her of fabricating sources, destroying her career and her marriage. The letter, now an enigma, sparked a purpose amidst the despair. She tucked away the paper, her eyes fixed on the window where the shadow had disappeared. Who was that figure? And why had her mother warned her? The next morning, as the rain subsided, Clara found fresh footprints near the cabin, leading into the forest. The mystery pulled her, but fear held her back. Her mind spun with fragmented memories. Arguments with her mother, an unpublished article about local corruption, and the divorce that had isolated her. The letter suggested the past held answers and dangers. Sitting at the table, she wrote in a notebook, "Why now?" The journey to unravel her mother's secret was just beginning, and Portland, with its silent echoes, would bear witness to her fight for redemption. The autumn sun struggled to break through the morning mist in Portland, Oregon, casting a diffused glow over the dense trees surrounding Clara Evans' cabin. At 29, she was a solitary figure, with disheveled brown hair falling over green eyes that carried the weight of a turbulent past. A former journalist for the Portland Tribune, Clara had lost everything 5 years ago when an investigation into City Hall corruption collapsed, and she was accused of fabricating sources. The scandal destroyed her career, her marriage to the photographer Mark, and left her with emotional scars that drove her into isolation in the forest. The cabin, an old wooden structure with loose floorboards and a crackling fireplace, was her refuge and her cell. That morning, her mother's letter still burned in her mind. Sitting at the scratched pine table, Clara reread the scribbled lines. "Search the past, but be careful who you trust." The date, May 15, 1970, and the word forgive haunted her. Her mother, Margaret Evans, a librarian with delicate hands and deep silences, had died of cancer in 1990, leaving Clara with few memories beyond arguments about her obsessive work. The letter suggested secrets she had never imagined. Who was the hooded figure from the night before? The fresh footprints in the mud, now dried under the weak sun, pointed toward the forest, but Clara hesitated to follow them. Portland in 1995 was a city of contrasts. Downtown streets buzzed with street performers and the sound of guitars on the corners, while the suburbs blended into the wild nature of the Willamette River. For Clara, however, the city was a reminder of her fall. She avoided the center, preferring the solitary trails, but the letter forced her to reconsider. She pulled out a yellowed map of the region, marked with her mother's annotations about old archives at the Central Library. Could the answers be there? The mystery drew her in, but the fear of reopening old wounds kept her still. Her first challenge arose when she decided to go to the city. Donning a waterproof coat and carrying the letter, Clara braved the crowded bus downtown. The noise of the passengers and the smell of wet coffee made her anxious, rekindling memories of Mark screaming that she had ruined their lives. At the library, a stone building with dusty stained glass windows, she found archives from 1970, but a librarian, a middle-aged man named Harold with crooked glasses, watched her suspiciously. "Researching the past, huh?" he said before walking away. Clara felt a chill. Was she being watched? Among the documents, she discovered a clipped article about a real estate scandal in 1970, involving a local magnate, Richard Holt, and an anonymous tip that was never investigated. Her mother's name appeared as a witness, crossed out in black ink. Clara's heart pounded. Did her mother know something? Before she could copy the article, the system failed, and Harold rushed her to leave. Frustrated, she put away her notes and noticed a young man in a hoodie watching her from the entrance. The same one from the night before? He disappeared before she could confront him. Back at the cabin, Clara found the door ajar again. Someone had rummaged through her things, leaving a new note. Stop digging. Panic flooded her, but so did a growing determination. She picked up the phone and called the only person she thought might help her. Ethan Reed, a 22-year-old environmental activist she had met at a rally years ago. Ethan, with messy blonde hair and an optimistic smile, showed up that afternoon intrigued. A mystery letter? This smells like a cover-up, he said, examining the footprints. Together, they decided to investigate Margaret's past, but the risk of reprisal hung in the air. The surrounding forest seemed to whisper secrets as the sun set, staining the sky orange. Clara felt she was on the threshold of something big and dangerous. Her mother's letter was the key, but every step revealed more questions. Who was watching her? What had her mother hidden? With Ethan by her side, she knew the journey to overcome her guilt and unravel the mystery was only just beginning, and Portland, with its somber beauty, would be the stage for this transformation. The fine rain was falling over Portland, turning the streets of Northwest into slippery mirrors as Clara Evans and Ethan Reed walked toward the Central Library. Clara's cabin, with its fresh footprints and the threatening note, still echoed in her mind, but Ethan's presence brought a renewed energy. At 22, he was a vivid contrast, shaggy blonde hair, a worn leather jacket, and a look that mixed curiosity and determination. An environmental activist known for protests against Willamette River pollution, Ethan had offered to help after hearing about the mysterious letter, intrigued by the possibility of a cover-up. Clara felt a knot in her stomach as she held her mother's yellowed map, the notes about old archives now an obsession. The memory of the librarian Harold and the hooded youth kept her on edge, but the guilt over having abandoned her journalistic career propelled her forward. She needed to uncover Margaret Evans' secret, even if it hurt. Ethan, beside her, carried a backpack with recording equipment, determined to document any evidence. If your mom was involved in something big, we'll find it, he said, his confident tone cutting through the tension. At the library, the air smelled of old paper and polished wood. Clara returned to the 1970 archives, but found the documents about Richard Holt's real estate scandal locked in a drawer. Harold appeared, his crooked glasses reflecting the dim light. Those records are confidential, he murmured, his eyes narrowed. Clara insisted, mentioning her mother's name, and for an instant, Harold hesitated before walking away. Ethan, capturing everything with a handheld camera, noted the reaction. He knows something, he whispered, which only increased Clara's unease. The conflict escalated when, upon leaving, Clara found an envelope slipped under the library door. Inside, there was a black and white photo of Margaret in 1970, standing next to Holt, with an X scratched over his face. On the back, a message read, "She paid a high price." Clara's heart raced. Did her mother know the magnate? Ethan suggested Margaret might have been silenced, which made Clara nauseous. The photo was a clue, but also a threat. Who had sent it? The hooded youth? The idea of being followed made her look over her shoulder as the rain intensified. Back at the cabin, the tension mounted. Clara found an old radio left on the table, tuned to a static frequency that emitted an irregular hiss. Ethan examined the device, discovering a hidden transmitter. "Someone is listening to us," he said, his voice strained. Panic washed over Clara, but so did a growing anger. She took the original letter and the photo, comparing the handwriting. They were different. Someone else was involved, manipulating the clues. Ethan proposed investigating Holt, who was still alive and living in a mansion on the outskirts, but Clara hesitated, fearing retaliation. Her emotions spun between fear and determination. The memory of her mother reading stories by candlelight returned, contrasting with the image in the photo. Had Margaret hidden something to protect her? Clara felt a renewed connection, but also an emptiness. Why hadn't she realized this before? Ethan, sensing her agitation, suggested a break in the forest, where the sound of rain on the trees was calming. There, he revealed that he had lost his parents in a protest, which motivated him to fight for justice. His vulnerability touched her, strengthening her trust in him. That night, as the storm roared, Clara wrote in her notebook, "Who am I without these shadows? The question guided her. Her mother's mystery, the invisible threat, and the alliance with Ethan were pulling her out of her shell. Portland, with its dark forests and wet streets, was becoming a mirror of her internal journey, where every step revealed more about her past and the price of her redemption. She knew the path would be dangerous, but the spark of hope ignited by the letter was beginning to burn brighter. Night was falling over Portland like a black veil, the rain drumming on the shingles of Clara Evans' cabin as she and Ethan Reed examined the hidden transmitter in the old radio. The flickering light of the fireplace cast dancing shadows on the wooden walls, reflecting the turmoil in their hearts. At 29, Clara felt the weight of her mother's letter and the photo with Richard Holt intensify, while Ethan, with his restless energy, adjusted the device, trying to pick up signals. The mystery that was pulling them out of their comfort zones was about to reveal a darker layer. The turning point came when Ethan managed to tune the transmitter, and a distorted voice broke through the static. "The girl is close. End this." Clara froze, the blood chilling in her veins. The message was clear. Someone wanted her dead, and the connection to her mother's past was the key. Ethan turned off the device, his eyes wide. "This is not a joke," he muttered, breaking the oppressive silence. The revelation hit her like a punch. Margaret Evans not only knew about a scandal, but perhaps had been murdered for it. The "forgive" in the letter took on a sinister meaning, an apology for indirectly involving her. Clara rushed to the memory box, spilling photos and papers onto the floor. Among them, she found a 1970 receipt for a bank deposit in Margaret's name, signed by Holt, with an exorbitant amount. An attached note read, "Silence guaranteed." Clara's hands trembled as she connected the dots. Her mother had taken money to keep quiet about the real estate scandal, but something had gone wrong. The date of the letter, written shortly before her death, suggested Margaret feared for Clara's safety. Who had silenced her? Holt, or someone more powerful? The tension escalated when a thud at the door made them jump. Clara opened it and found a soaked envelope containing an old key and a scratched address. An abandoned house on the outskirts of Forest Park. Ethan took the key, his fingers hesitant. "This could be a trap," he warned, but Clara's determined look convinced him. The forest around the cabin seemed to whisper threats, the dark trees bowing in the wind. They decided to go to the location the next morning, but Clara's fear was palpable. What if they found more than just answers? In the city, the Portland weather mirrored her internal turmoil. The illuminated storefronts of boutiques contrasted with the damp streets, where homeless people sheltered under awnings. Clara felt the gazes, imagining that every shadow could be the hooded figure. Ethan, trying to calm her, suggested the transmission indicated an organized group, perhaps linked to Holt. The idea left her nauseous, but also motivated. She picked up the notebook and wrote, "My mother protected me. Now I will honor her." The initial confrontation came that night, when a car stopped near the cabin. Clara and Ethan hid, peering through the window. A burly man got out, left a package, and then sped away. Inside, there was a cassette tape with Margaret's voice, recorded days before her death. "Clara, if you hear this, run. They know you exist." The recording ended abruptly, leaving a deafening silence. Clara fell to her knees, her tears mixing with the dust on the floor. Her mother had foreseen the danger, but she had left her a clue, the key. The revelation transformed her. Fear gave way to a controlled rage, and Ethan, seeing her strength, promised to help her face whatever came next. Portland, with its melancholic beauty and buried secrets, was becoming the stage for a fight for justice. The key was the next step, but each discovery deepened the mystery. Who were they? Why had Margaret trusted Clara to decipher this? With the tape as evidence, Clara knew her journey of overcoming her past would require more than courage. It would require confronting the shadows her mother had left behind. The dawn brought a pale light over Portland, the mist slowly dissipating as Clara Evans and Ethan Reed prepared to follow the lead of the antique key. The cabin, still permeated by the echo of Margaret's tape, seemed smaller under the weight of the previous night's revelation. Clara, her eyes swollen from dried tears, held the cassette like a talisman, the sound of her mother's voice. "Run, they know you exist," reverberating in her mind. At 29, she felt a mix of renewed grief and a fierce determination that propelled her to act, despite the fear tightening her chest. Ethan, his leather jacket soaked from the night's rain, adjusted a backpack with a flashlight and tools, trying to stay calm. The discovery of the transmitter and the recording left him alert, but also intrigued. He watched Clara fold the map with the Forest Park address, noticing the tension in her shoulders. "Let's take it slow," he suggested, his voice low, as he checked the car borrowed from an activist friend. The idea of a trap worried him, but Clara's energy, a blend of vulnerability and resolve, motivated him to support her. The drive to Forest Park was silent, the sound of the tires on the wet road accompanied by the drumming rain. The forest, dense and dark, seemed to swallow the daylight, the tall trees creating a natural tunnel that heightened the sense of isolation. Clara clutched the key in her hand, the cold metal against her skin a constant reminder of the danger. Arriving at the abandoned house, a rotting wooden structure with broken windows, she hesitated at the door, her heart pounding. Ethan forced the entry, revealing an interior covered in dust and cobwebs, where the air smelled of mold and forgotten things. Clara's first reaction was shock. Among broken furniture, she found a locked trunk, the latch matching the key perfectly. As she opened it, yellowed documents spilled out, including a letter from Margaret dated 1970, confessing to having witnessed Holt bribing officials to cover up illegal deforestation. "I took the money to give you a better life," it read, the words blurred by old tears. Clara fell to her knees, the weight of her mother's guilt hitting her like a wave. Ethan helped her up, his eyes full of empathy. "She did what she thought was right," he said, but Clara shook her head, torn between forgiveness and anger. The adjustment to the new reality came with a practical discovery. Among the papers was a map of the forest with an X marked, suggesting a hiding place. Ethan proposed exploring it, but Clara insisted on returning to the cabin first, fearing the transmitter was still tracking them. Back there, she hid the documents in a sealed tin, burying it under a loose floorboard. The feeling of being watched made her look out the window every few minutes, the sound of breaking branches in the forest increasing her paranoia. Emotionally, Clara struggled to process everything. The letter explained Margaret's silence, but also exposed her as Holt's accomplice. She remembered nights when her mother cried alone, now understanding the sacrifice. Ethan, sensing her turmoil, suggested contacting a hacker friend to track the transmitter, an idea that scared her but also excited her. Together, they formulated a plan: investigate the X on the map while seeking allies. The forest, with its stark beauty, became a symbol of her journey, a place of secrets and possibilities. That afternoon, as the sun set, Clara wrote in her notebook, "She gave me a chance. Now I will use it." The revelation about Margaret transformed her, forcing her to balance grief with the mission of exposing the truth. Ethan, by her side, promised to protect her, and Portland, with its wet streets and mysterious forests, prepared to witness the next steps of her redemption. The gray light of a rainy morning flooded Clara Evans' cabin, the sound of water running off the roof mingling with the crackle of the fireplace. At 29, she felt the weight of Margaret's documents like an anchor, the letter confessing the bribe, and the map with the marked X now her compass. Ethan Reed, his leather jacket still damp, adjusted his flashlight, his eyes fixed on the plan they had formulated the night before. Forest Park called to them, but a new challenge was emerging, bringing fresh layers of complication to Clara's journey. As they prepared supplies, a phone call shattered the silence. It was Mark, her ex-husband, his voice hoarse and urgent. "Clara, I've heard rumors about you digging into Margaret's past. Stop before you get hurt." The warning caught her off guard. How did he know? Their divorce 5 years ago had been bitter, but Mark had never shown interest in her life since. Suspicion flared. Could he be involved? Clara hung up, her heart pounding, the doubt about her ex leaving her unsettled. Ethan, noticing her expression, asked if she trusted him, and she only shook her head uncertain. The expedition into the forest brought a second obstacle. Following the map, they reached a clearing where the X indicated a moss-covered stone. When they removed it, they found a sealed metal box, but before they could open it, the sound of breaking branches echoed nearby. A hooded man emerged, his face hidden, brandishing a knife. "That's not yours," he growled, lunging forward. Ethan shoved Clara back, dodging the attack, and the intruder fled when he heard the distant sound of a car. Adrenaline surged through Clara's veins, but the intact box kept her focused. Inside, they found Margaret's diary, with entries detailing secret meetings with Holt and a mention of the Council, a mysterious group controlling the scandal. Back at the cabin, the tension intensified. Clara read the diary by the firelight, discovering that Margaret had been coerced into silence after witnessing a murder linked to the illegal deforestation. The Council appeared to be a network of influential figures, and Holt was merely a pawn. A final entry, dated 1990, read, "I protected Clara, but they found me." Terror gripped her. Her mother had been murdered, and she was the next target. Ethan suggested that the council could include local figures, perhaps even Mark, given the phone call. The possibility made her sick, but also determined to expose the truth. A new obstacle arose when Clara tried to call a journalist friend, but the line went dead, and a strange buzzing took its place. Was the transmitter still active? Ethan proposed using his activist contacts to track the signals, but that would expose them further. The forest, now a labyrinth of dangers, reflected the complexity of her mission. Clara felt the weight of being hunted, but the diary connected her to Margaret in a visceral way, fueling her resilience. Emotionally, she swung between fear and purpose. The memory of Mark laughing during an old argument made her question if he knew more than he let on. Ethan, sensing her struggle, shared a plan. Infiltrate a charity event where Holt was being honored, looking for clues. Clara hesitated, but the image of Margaret writing the diary convinced her. She wrote in her notebook, "I won't run away like she did." The decision strengthened her, but the risk of confronting the council left her on the verge of collapse. Portland, with its wet streets and whispering forests, was becoming a battlefield. The box, the diary, and the call from Mark intertwined challenges that complicated Clara's search for redemption. With Ethan as her ally, she knew that every step brought her closer to answers, and to an inevitable confrontation. The rain outside seemed to applaud her courage, but also to warn her of the dangers ahead. The yellow light of an oil lamp illuminated Clara Evans' cabin, the crackle of wood in the fireplace mixing with the distant sound of rain falling over Portland. At 29, she held Margaret's diary with trembling hands, the yellowed pages revealing a past that made her question everything she knew about herself. Ethan Reed, sitting in a makeshift chair, watched her with a mixture of admiration and concern, his blonde hair falling over his eyes as he leafed through the forest map. The decision to confront the council and Richard Holt's charity event hung between them, bringing dilemmas that would test their emotions and their alliance. Clara felt a growing internal conflict. Margaret's confession about the murder and the bribe left her torn. Part of her wanted to forgive her mother for taking the money, imagining her as a woman desperate to protect her, but another part blamed her for not resisting. Childhood memories flooded back. Margaret reading stories by candlelight, her sad eyes, and tears streamed down Clara's face as she read an entry about a meeting with Holt, where he had threatened her. Ethan, noticing her silence, approached hesitantly. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said, his soft voice cutting the tension. Clara looked away, uncertain if she could fully trust him, despite her gratitude. The interaction with Ethan revealed complex layers. He had shared his own loss, his parents killed in a protest, but Clara felt a wall between them. When he suggested infiltrating the event as her assistant, she hesitated, fearing to expose her vulnerability. "What if they catch us?" she asked, her voice low. Ethan responded with a wry smile, promising to improvise, but the plan made her anxious. The idea of facing Holt, the man who perhaps ordered Margaret's death, filled her with rage, but also the fear of failing again, as she had in the investigation that ruined her career. The emotional dilemma intensified when Clara found an old photograph in the diary, showing Margaret with an unknown man, not Holt. The caption read, "My protector." Who was he? The possibility of Margaret having a secret ally intrigued her, but also confused her. Ethan suggested he could be someone inside the council, a traitor who helped her mother, but the theory made her sick. What if this protector was still alive, watching her? She tucked the photo away, her heart heavy, feeling that every clue was leading her deeper into an emotional labyrinth. Outside the cabin, the forest whispered under the rain, and Clara felt the weight of being watched. Ethan proposed a walk to clear her mind, and on the damp trail, he opened up about his guilt over not saving his parents, connecting it to Clara's fight for redemption. His vulnerability touched her, softening her defenses. "Maybe together we can fix what's broken," he said, his tone full of hope. Clara nodded, but the image of Mark returned. Did he know about the protector? Distrust gnawed at her, forcing her to question her choices. Back inside, she wrote in her notebook, "Trust or betrayal?" The question guided her as she planned the event. Ethan suggested disguises, but Clara insisted on carrying the diary as proof, even at risk. The decision strengthened her, but the fear of losing Ethan or being betrayed kept her alert. Portland, with its streets reflecting diffuse lights and the forest as a veil of mysteries, became the mirror of her dilemmas. The alliance with Ethan was a beacon, but the shadows of the past, Margaret Holt, the unknown protector, challenged her to balance emotion and reason. Night fell, and Clara felt the event would be a test. The diary, the photo, and Ethan's words propelled her forward, but the burden of deciding between trusting and suspecting left her on the edge of an emotional cliff. The journey of overcoming her past would require more than courage. It would require faith in herself and in others. The foggy night in Portland enveloped Clara Evans' cabin in an oppressive silence, the moonlight filtering through the cracked windows and casting trembling shadows on the wooden walls. At 29, she felt the weight of Margaret's diary and the photo of the protector as a growing burden, while Ethan Reed organized their disguise for Richard Holt's charity event. The decision to confront the magnate escalated the tension, but new clues and dangers were emerging, pulling Clara into an abyss of intrigue that would test her resilience. The next morning, as they prepared, an envelope slid under the door. Inside, there was a 1970 newspaper clipping about the illegal deforestation, with a handwritten note. Holt didn't act alone. Look for the river. Clara recognized the handwriting. It wasn't Margaret's, but someone who knew the case. Her heart pounded. The Willamette River, with its murky waters and hidden banks, became a new clue, but also a risk. Ethan suggested investigating before the event, and Clara, despite her fear, agreed, feeling that time was running out. The expedition to the river introduced an element of danger. Walking along the moss-covered banks, they found an abandoned briefcase, sealed with a padlock. When they opened it with one of Ethan's tools, they revealed photos of Margaret with the man from the earlier photo, identified as Thomas Grady, a former detective who had investigated Holt. A note read, "He knows too much." Before they could process this, a drone buzzed above, its lights flashing in the fog. Clara froze, the mechanical sound echoing like a threat. Ethan pulled her behind a tree, and the device flew away, but the feeling of surveillance left her tense. Back at the cabin, the intrigue deepened. Clara researched Grady on an old library microfilm, discovering that he had disappeared in 1971 after reporting corruption. A connection with Margaret suggested he was the protector, but also a victim. The diary confirmed secret meetings, and one entry read, "Thomas warned me about the council. They are watching." Clara felt a chill. The council wasn't just a group, but an active organization, possibly using technology to track her. Ethan proposed hacking local signals, but the risk of exposure made them hesitant. The tension escalated when Clara received an anonymous call, the distorted voice whispering, "Leave the past alone, or Ethan pays." Panic flooded her, but so did a rage that made her grip the phone tightly. Who dared to threaten her only ally? She hung up, her heart racing, and showed the incident to Ethan, who turned pale. The possibility of him being a target shook him, but he reaffirmed his commitment, suggesting the call confirmed they were on the right track. Together, they decided to use the event as bait, but the fear of losing Ethan consumed her. Emotionally, Clara struggled with the pressure. The image of Grady with Margaret made her wonder if he was still alive, watching her from the shadows. Memories of her crying mother returned, now with a new meaning. Margaret had lived in terror. Clara wrote in her notebook, "They see me, but I will see them first." Determination guided her, but the drone and the phone call left her on the verge of collapse. Ethan, sensing her struggle, suggested a plan: record the event to expose the council, using activist contacts. Portland, with its wet streets reflecting diffused lights and the river whispering secrets, was becoming a stage for tension. The briefcase, the drone, and the phone call intertwined clues that escalated the danger. Clara felt that every discovery brought her closer to Margaret, but also to an imminent confrontation. With Ethan by her side, she knew the journey would require more than courage. It would require facing the unknown with her eyes wide open. The soft light of dusk tinted Portland in shades of gray, the rain reducing to a fine drizzle that streamed down the windows of Clara Evans' cabin. At 29, she felt the weight of Margaret's diary and Thomas Grady's briefcase as a bridge to the past, while Ethan Reed adjusted a hidden camera in his backpack, preparing for Richard Holt's charity event. The tension from the anonymous call and the drone still lingered, but the connections between the characters were beginning to strengthen, revealing deeper layers in her journey of overcoming her past. Clara and Ethan developed a silent synchronization. As she studied the diary, finding an entry about Margaret's meeting with Grady at an abandoned church, Ethan suggested the location might hide more clues. The idea brought them together, despite Clara's initial mistrust. She admired his determination, but the threat against Ethan made her hesitate to risk him. Sitting at the table, she traced the map, her fingers trembling as she marked the church, while Ethan watched, his eyes reflecting a mix of courage and vulnerability. "We're going together," he said, his voice firm, sealing a tacit pact. The visit to the church brought a moment of emotional connection. The stone structure, covered in ivy and with broken stained glass windows, exuded an air of abandonment. Inside, they found a confessional with a secret drawer containing an audio tape labeled proof. Clara held it, her heart racing, feeling Margaret's presence. Ethan set up a portable recorder, and Grady's voice emerged, describing the council's plan to eliminate witnesses, including Margaret. The recording ended with an abrupt click, suggesting an interruption. Clara fell back against the wall, tears streaming, as Ethan briefly hugged her, a gesture that both comforted her and startled her with its intimacy. Outside the church, the relationship with Mark resurfaced as a disturbing echo. Clara received a text message, a rare advance in 1995, from an unknown number saying, "Mark knows where you are." Suspicion consumed her. She remembered Mark defending Holt in past arguments, and the possibility of him being linked to the council made her question everything. Ethan, noticing her agitation, suggested confronting him, but Clara refused, preferring to use him as bait at the event. The decision divided her. Did using her ex-husband make her as manipulative as her enemies? The charity event, scheduled for the following night at a luxurious downtown ballroom, became the focus. Clara sewed the diary into an inner pocket of her dress, while Ethan prepared concealed microphones. The tension between them grew when he confessed to fearing for her safety, revealing an attachment that surprised him. Clara, touched, admitted she felt alive for the first time in years, the risk only drawing them closer. The forest around the cabin, now a symbol of protection, contrasted with the illuminated city awaiting them. Emotionally, Clara balanced grief and hope. Grady's tape connected her to Margaret, but also exposed her to greater dangers. She wrote in her notebook, "She guided me here. I will not stop." Ethan, in turn, saw in Clara a reflection of his own search for justice, strengthening his loyalty. Portland, with its wet streets and the church as a forgotten sanctuary, reflected the complexity of their connections. The recording, Mark's message, and the plan for the event intertwined challenges that tested their mutual trust. Night fell, and Clara felt the event would be a watershed moment. With Ethan by her side, she knew the journey required more than evidence. It required facing the past and the ties that shaped it. The drizzle outside seemed to wash away her doubts, preparing her for the imminent confrontation. The foggy Portland night glittered with artificial lights as Clara Evans and Ethan Reed approached the downtown event hall, the air thick with dampness and expectation. At 29, Clara felt the weight of Margaret's diary pressing against her chest, hidden in the pocket of the black dress she'd chosen as a disguise. Ethan, beside her, adjusted the hidden microphone beneath his jacket, his eyes fixed on the luxurious ballroom where Richard Holt was to be honored. The tension was reaching a peak, the conflicts weaving together into a critical moment that would test their courage and push them to their limit. Inside, the ballroom was a sea of tuxedos and elegant gowns, the clinking of glasses mixing with hushed conversations. Clara spotted Holt, a man in his 70s with gray hair and a forced smile, surrounded by influential figures. Grady's tape in Clara's purse seemed to pulse, but the sight of Mark in the crowd made her freeze. He stared at her, his gaze charged with something between surprise and threat, before approaching. "What are you doing here?" he whispered, his voice sharp. Clara flinched, her heart racing, but the doubt about his loyalty consumed her. The confrontation began when Holt took the stage, praising his legacy in the city, but Clara activated the microphone, capturing his words. Ethan circled, recording faces, when a security guard noticed them, approaching with firm steps. Clara feigned a feint, distracting him, while Ethan slipped away to a corner. The maneuver worked, but the incident drew curious glances, including those of a man in a dark suit who watched her from afar. Perhaps a member of the council? The tension mounted, and Clara felt the game was exposed. The crisis peaked when Mark cornered her in a hallway. "You don't understand what you're messing with," he said, his eyes blazing with anger. "Holt paid me to keep you quiet after the newspaper scandal." The confession stunned her. Mark had been a pawn, silencing her for money. Before she could react, he ripped the diary from her pocket, but Ethan intervened, knocking him aside with a shove. Chaos ensued, with security guards rushing over and guests screaming, while Clara retrieved the diary, her heart pounding. Outside the ballroom, the rain met them, but the pursuit continued. A black car followed them through the wet streets, its headlights cutting through the fog. Ethan quickened his pace, pulling Clara into an alley, where they hid behind crates. The sound of screeching tires echoed, and a voice yelled, "Find them!" Clara clutched the diary, her fear mixing with a fierce determination. The tape and Holt's recordings were evidence, but Mark's betrayal left her in shock, forcing her to reevaluate everything. Emotionally, she struggled to process. The image of Mark as an ally transformed into a villain, and the guilt of not having seen it gnawed at her. Ethan, breathless beside her, touched her shoulder, a gesture that anchored her. "We have what we need," he said, his voice firm. Clara nodded, but the possibility of the council retaliating kept her on high alert. She wrote in her notebook, sheltered in the alley, "Betrayal made me stronger." The phrase guided her, but the risk of losing Ethan or being captured left her on the verge of collapse. Portland, with its slippery streets and the ballroom as a stage for intrigue, reflected the intensity of the moment. Mark's confession, the pursuit, and the recordings intertwined conflicts that set the stage for the climax. With Ethan as her shield, Clara knew the next step would be decisive: expose the council or succumb to their games. The rain outside seemed to wash away the past, but also warned of the final battle approaching. The darkness enveloped Portland as Clara Evans and Ethan Reed took shelter in the alley, the sound of the rain mixing with the distant roar of the car pursuing them. At 29, Clara felt Margaret's diary like a shield, the recordings of Holt and Grady's tape weighing down her bag. Ethan, breathless beside her, adjusted the microphone, his eyes shining with a mix of fear and determination. The confrontation with the council was close, and the decisions they made that night would define the course of her redemption. The pursuit forced them to act. They ran to an abandoned garage on the banks of the Willamette, the smell of oil and rust filling the air as they hid among scrap metal. Clara heard approaching footsteps, the sound of boots in the mud echoing in the night. A man in a dark suit appeared, a pistol gleaming in the faint light. "Hand over the evidence," he ordered, his voice cold. Ethan threw a can of paint at him, distracting him, and Clara seized the opportunity to flee, her heart pounding. The confrontation left her tense, but also determined not to yield. The critical decision came when they found a payphone on the street. Clara fumbled with the coins, calling one of Ethan's contacts, a radio host named Lila who could broadcast the recordings live. "Are you ready for this?" Lila asked, her voice crackling on the line. Clara hesitated, the risk of exposing the council, bringing the possibility of retaliation, but Margaret's image guided her. "Yes," she replied, handing over the tape and the recordings. Ethan supported her, connecting the microphone to an improvised transmitter, knowing there was no turning back. The moment of choice intensified when Mark caught up to them, his face contorted with rage. "You're going to destroy everything," he shouted, trying to grab Clara. Ethan restrained him, but Mark revealed, "Holt promised me immunity if I turned you in." The betrayal cut deep, but Clara, tears in her eyes, faced him. "You never knew me," she said, her voice firm, before pushing him against the wall. The decision to cut ties with the past liberated her, and Mark fled, leaving them with the evidence intact. Outside the garage, the rain intensified, and a second car stopped, unloading 2 armed men. Clara and Ethan ran into the forest, the dense trees offering cover. She stumbled, the diary falling, and one of the pursuers grabbed it, but Ethan tackled him with a branch, recovering it. Adrenaline kept her going, but emotional exhaustion pressed down on her. Hiding behind a tree trunk, she wrote in her notebook, her hand trembling, "This ends today." The phrase anchored her, reinforcing her resolve. The connection with Ethan solidified in that moment. He protected her, risking himself to ensure the recordings reached Lila. "You're stronger than you think," he whispered, his tone filled with admiration. Clara felt a bond forming, their mutual trust uniting them against the danger. The forest, with its damp whisper, became a battlefield where their decisions shaped the future. Emotionally, Clara balanced grief and victory. Mark's confession hurt her, but it also freed her from the guilt over her marriage. The pursuit exhausted her, but the proximity of exposing the council filled her with purpose. With the evidence en route to the radio, she knew the next step would be the final confrontation. Portland, with its drenched streets and the forest as a refuge, reflected the intensity of her struggle. The imminent broadcast promised revelations, but also deadly risks. Night was advancing, and Clara felt the climax was within reach. With Ethan as her ally, she would face whatever came, ready to turn pain into justice. The rain outside seemed to wash away her wounds, preparing her for the decisive moment approaching. The darkness enveloped Portland as Clara Evans and Ethan Reed took shelter in the alley, the sound of the rain mixing with the distant roar of the car pursuing them. At 29, Clara felt Margaret's diary like a shield, the recordings of Holt and Grady's tape weighing down her bag. Ethan, breathless beside her, adjusted the microphone, his eyes shining with a mix of fear and determination. The confrontation with the council was close, and the decisions they made that night would define the course of her redemption. The pursuit forced them to act. They ran to an abandoned garage on the banks of the Willamette, the smell of oil and rust filling the air as they hid among scrap metal. Clara heard approaching footsteps, the sound of boots in the mud echoing in the night. A man in a dark suit appeared, a pistol gleaming in the faint light. "Hand over the evidence," he ordered, his voice cold. Ethan threw a can of paint at him, distracting him, and Clara seized the opportunity to flee, her heart pounding. The confrontation left her tense, but also determined not to yield. The critical decision came when they found a payphone on the street. Clara fumbled with the coins, calling one of Ethan's contacts, a radio host named Lila who could broadcast the recordings live. "Are you ready for this?" Lila asked, her voice crackling on the line. Clara hesitated, the risk of exposing the council, bringing the possibility of retaliation, but Margaret's image guided her. "Yes," she replied, handing over the tape and the recordings. Ethan supported her, connecting the microphone to an improvised transmitter, knowing there was no turning back. The moment of choice intensified when Mark caught up to them, his face contorted with rage. "You're going to destroy everything," he shouted, trying to grab Clara. Ethan restrained him, but Mark revealed, "Holt promised me immunity if I turned you in." The betrayal cut deep, but Clara, tears in her eyes, faced him. "You never knew me," she said, her voice firm, before pushing him against the wall. The decision to cut ties with the past liberated her, and Mark fled, leaving them with the evidence intact. Outside the garage, the rain intensified, and a second car stopped, unloading 2 armed men. Clara and Ethan ran into the forest, the dense trees offering cover. She stumbled, the diary falling, and one of the pursuers grabbed it, but Ethan tackled him with a branch, recovering it. Adrenaline kept her going, but emotional exhaustion pressed down on her. Hiding behind a tree trunk, she wrote in her notebook, her hand trembling, "This ends today." The phrase anchored her, reinforcing her resolve. The connection with Ethan solidified in that moment. He protected her, risking himself to ensure the recordings reached Lila. "You're stronger than you think," he whispered, his tone filled with admiration. Clara felt a bond forming, their mutual trust uniting them against the danger. The forest, with its damp whisper, became a battlefield where their decisions shaped the future. Emotionally, Clara balanced grief and victory. Mark's confession hurt her, but it also freed her from the guilt over her marriage. The pursuit exhausted her, but the proximity of exposing the council filled her with purpose. With the evidence en route to the radio, she knew the next step would be the final confrontation. Portland, with its drenched streets and the forest as a refuge, reflected the intensity of her struggle. The imminent broadcast promised revelations, but also deadly risks. Night was advancing, and Clara felt the climax was within reach. With Ethan as her ally, she would face whatever came, ready to turn pain into justice. The rain outside seemed to wash away her wounds, preparing her for the decisive moment approaching. The Portland forest erupted in chaos under the torrential rain, the sound of gunshots cutting through the air as Clara Evans and Ethan Reed moved between the trees. At 29, Clara felt the weight of the gun in her hand and Margaret's diary against her chest, her heart pounding as she faced the final confrontation. Ethan, beside her, held the transmitter, his face illuminated by a flash of lightning that revealed the determination in his eyes. The tension had peaked, and the answers they sought were one step away from being revealed. The pursuers surrounded them, 3 armed men emerging from the fog, led by the man in the dark suit who had followed them at the ballroom. "It's over," he snarled, pointing his pistol. Clara raised her weapon, her finger trembling on the trigger, but a distant boom interrupted the moment, sirens. Lila's broadcast had reached the police, and red and blue lights cut through the darkness. The men hesitated, and Clara seized the opportunity, firing a warning shot into the air, forcing them to back away. Ethan activated the transmitter, sending one last signal, and Lila's voice echoed over the radio. Recordings confirmed. The council is exposed. The final twist came when a fourth man appeared, his hood falling to reveal Thomas Grady, the former detective from the photo. Alive but aged, he limped, his face marked by scars. "I tried to protect her," he said, his voice raspy, pointing to Clara. "Margaret made me promise to guard this." He handed over a sealed folder containing documents that proved the council, led by Holt and including corrupt judges, had ordered Margaret's murder to cover up the deforestation. Grady confessed to surviving by faking his own death, but had failed to save her. Clara fell to her knees, tears mixing with the mud, her grief transforming into relief. The surprising resolution unfolded as the police arrived, handcuffing the men of the council. Holt was dragged away, screaming about immunity, but the evidence, the recordings, the diary, and the documents sealed his fate. Mark, captured in the confusion, confessed to being coerced, begging for forgiveness. Clara looked at him, her heart heavy, but chose silence, letting justice take its course. Grady, free for cooperating, turned himself involuntarily, relieved to end the burden of decades. Emotionally, Clara felt a catharsis. Margaret's death was avenged, and the truth freed her from the guilt of her past. She embraced Ethan, the warmth of the contact a symbol of her newfound strength, as the sirens faded away. The forest, now silent, seemed to applaud her victory. Grady, before leaving, whispered, "She would be proud." The words struck her, closing a cycle of pain. The rain diminished, revealing a clear sky, and Clara wrote in her notebook, still sheltered against a tree, "The shadow is gone. The light begins." The phrase marked her rebirth, the overcoming of trauma, and Margaret's redemption. Ethan, smiling, held her hand, promising to continue the fight for justice together. The police confirmed the recordings reached the city, triggering investigations that would bring down the council. Portland, with its washed streets and the forest as a witness, reflected Clara's transformation. The final confrontation not only exposed the corruption, but gave her back to herself. With Ethan and the evidence in hand, she knew the nightmare was over, paving the way for a future of hope. The night gave way to a distant dawn, promising a new beginning that she would embrace wholeheartedly. The morning dawned over Portland, the sun filtering through the dissipating fog, staining the Willamette River in golden hues. Clara Evans walked along the bank, the sound of rushing water a gentle melody that contrasted with the events of the previous night. At 29, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders, Margaret's diary clutched in her hands like a hard-won treasure. Ethan Reed walked with her, his blonde hair still damp from the rain, a shy smile on his lips as he carried Grady's folder. The battle against the council was over, leaving scars but also a deep renewal. Clara reflected on her journey. Margaret's initial letter had pulled her from a life of isolation, forcing her to confront the guilt over her lost career and the divorce from Mark. The truth about her mother's murder, revealed by Grady, brought grief, but also peace. Margaret had sacrificed for her, and Clara had honored that sacrifice. Sitting on a bench by the river, she opened the diary, rereading the last entry. "For Clara, my light." Tears flowed, but they were tears of relief, sealing her mother's arc of redemption. Ethan, beside her, also found closure. Fighting alongside Clara had rekindled his passion for justice, healing the guilt over his parents' deaths. He handed Clara a newspaper clipping from that morning, headlines announcing the fall of the council and Holt's arrest. "You changed the city," he said, his voice full of pride. The connection between them flourished, a partnership forged in adversity that promised mutual support. Clara smiled, feeling that, for the first time, she belonged to something greater. Mark's arc, though bitter, was tied off. His confession in the forest had led to his arrest, but Clara chose not to hold a grudge. Writing in her notebook, she noted, "Forgiveness is my gift." The decision freed her from anger, allowing her to look toward the future. Grady, now under police protection, had sent a letter of thanks, promising to testify against the remnants of the council. Justice, though imperfect, was underway, and Clara knew her courage had inspired it. Portland, with its washed streets and the forest as a silent witness, reflected her transformation. The city that had welcomed her in her fall now saw her reborn, a symbol of resilience. Clara planned to use the recordings to found an organization supporting silenced journalists, a legacy for Margaret. Ethan suggested expanding their activist efforts, and together, they dreamed of a lasting impact. The idea filled her with purpose, a bridge between the past and the future. Sitting by the river, Clara felt a peace she had never known. The breeze carried the scent of pine, and children laughed in the distance, a contrast to the nights of terror. She wrote her final entry. "From the shadows, I found the light. May others seek it." The phrase closed her journey but opened an invitation to others. With Ethan, she knew the fight would continue, but now with hope. The story of triumph over adversity proves that even in darkness, the truth can shine. Watch the next video to discover new journeys of courage and redemption. Subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories, and share this message with anyone who needs hope. Together, we can transform pain into strength. Start now